Thank you, Madam Speaker. And let me just start off by congratulating my good friend, the ever so passionate and a great advocate for her community, the member from King Vaughan, for her incredible speech. Madam Speaker, Canadians are going through a housing hell right now. When 9 out of 10 young people say that they've lost the dream of home ownership, where newcomers won't be able to realize home ownership, and the fact that the IMF now is saying that Canada is most at risk in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. This is a major housing crisis that we need to take seriously in this country before people start losing their homes. But we need to understand how we got here in the first place. Well, Madam Speaker, this Liberal-NDP government spent more money than every single government before them combined. Madam Speaker, let me put this into context. Between 2015 and 2023, this Liberal-NDP government spent more money than every single government from 1867 until 2015 combined. And that led to 40-year highs in inflation, which led to the most rapid mortgage interest rate hikes we haven't seen in the last 3 decades. The Bank of Canada had to counter something with these interest rate hikes. It was a reactionary, it was reaction to something, and that something was the government deficit. And it's not just Conservatives who admit that government deficits fueled inflation, which made the interest rates go up. It's actually random Liberals and others who said the same thing. I'll point to the 3 M's, Manley, Macklem, and Morneau, who all admitted that government spending fuels inflation. Also, Mark Carney, who can possibly be the next Liberal leader, it seems like. He also said that inflation was due to domestic pressures, nothing to do with outside, like the Liberals and the NDP would try to make you believe that it's always someone else's problem and never theirs. But someone who could be a Liberal leader, even he admits that the inflation we see today is due to domestic pressures. Even the current finance minister admitted this. Even though she doesn't believe in it, she still admitted to it that government deficits do fuel inflation. It's too bad that after she said she wanted to be careful of not fueling the inflationary fire, she dumped $63 billion of a jerry can of fuel on that inflationary fire. And what ended up happening? Inflation went up, and so did mortgage interest rates. And once again, this is why Canada is now most at risk in the G7 for a mortgage default crisis. This Liberal-NDP government shows its incompetence over and over and over again. I mean, it's these geniuses who ended up spending $89 billion, almost $90 billion on housing, only to have housing cost double in this country. Mortgages have doubled. Rents have doubled. But let's look into that a little bit deeper. Why have mortgages doubled in this country? Like I identified, it was a domino effect. All that money printing, all that money printing that this government did was bounced off by bonds, but what ended up happening was we flooded the market by doing that, and there was too much money chasing too few goods, which is literally the definition of inflation. And so when inflation went up due to all the government deficits, the Bank of Canada had to do the opposite of what this government is doing. And former Liberal Finance Minister John Manley put it perfectly, who said today's situation is much like the Liberal-NDP government deficit is like pressing the gas, the inflationary gas, while the Bank of Canada is slamming on the brakes as hard as it can with their interest rate hikes. Both things are happening at one time. They're working in opposite directions. The engine is going to blow. But who's going to be left to be paying all this mess? It's Canadian taxpayers. Right. There's only one party in this House that cares for taxpayers' money and wants to make sure that Canadians don't lose their homes. That's why our leader, the next Prime Minister of Canada, the honourable member from Carleton, put this motion forward. It's because we are more worried than ever that Canadians may lose their home because of the out of control deficit spending by this Liberal-NDP government. Housing costs have gone up. They've gone up, they've doubled in this country after these guys spent $89 billion on housing. How does that even happen in a country like Canada? Madam Speaker, I'll tell you the reality of the failed policies of this government. I met a single mom recently in Calgary, a single mom of 3 kids. Her rent went up by $600 a month. She was already struggling to feed her kids and keep a roof over their heads. She was literally in the stat of one in 5 that are skipping meals today. She told me her heartbreaking story that because of the cost of rent going up due to these deficits, she actually had to move back in with her abusive ex-husband. This is the reality of Canadians today, that this Liberal-NDP's government's failed policies have put Canadians in these type of positions. And you can only imagine how many more of these stories we hear as we travel the country. It's a sad state of what Canada is today, and it should not be. But it's after 8 years of this Liberal-NDP government, they are definitely not worth this cost. The people that we're talking to industry stakeholders and everyday Canadians. And what are we hearing? Either people can't get into housing because of supply, and we're talking to the people who actually build the homes. The number one issue today is interest rates that were fueled by the government's deficits. Builders will be sitting on land and they won't be able to build because in some cases it doesn't make sense. With all the bureaucracy, with all the red tape that was created by this government and the willingness to let municipalities create more and more bureaucracy, it's getting harder and harder to build, let alone how much housing costs have gone up for the builders. In some cases, it doesn't make sense to build. That's why we need to see a balanced, fiscally responsible plan back to balanced budgets. And I hope that this Prime Minister finally understands that budgets do not balance themselves.
Don't hold your breath.
My colleague says don't hold your breath, and I won't. Madam Speaker, now let's put this back into context why we brought forward this motion in the first place. It's because of a looming crisis that could take place in this country if this Liberal-NDP government doesn't bring balanced budgets back in. And I want to remind Canadians once again that it was this finance minister back in November who told Canadians and promised Canadians in writing that she would bring balanced budgets in 27-28. And I'll take it a step back before that. It was the same finance minister that told Canadians, go out and borrow as much as you want. Interest rates will be low for a very long time. So people started getting mortgages. We saw there was a big boom in people wanting housing. What those borrowers didn't expect was after she had said that she would dump hundreds of billions of dollars of fuel on the inflationary fire that made their interest rates go up, and now there's this looming crisis happening. Then in November of just last year, she's promised to bring in balanced budgets. We thought there was a hope that maybe they saw the light. But once again, it was only months after that where she said, I'm just kidding, I was never going to balance budgets anyways. And then she promised to balance the budget in the year, never. Losing all hope for Canadians that were just looking for that. But Madam Speaker, I'll tell you what we need to do today. Under our common sense leader, we're going to bring a common sense plan where we're going to balance the budget so we can bring down the inflation and we can make sure that Canadians don't lose their homes. When the member from Carleton becomes Prime Minister of this country, we're going to make sure we can bring home more homes that people can actually afford. We're going to bring down costs. We're going to bring home lower prices by axing the failed carbon tax that is inflationary, making the cost of everything go up. And we're going to make sure that once we bring down the inflation by controlling the deficits, we're going to make sure people don't lose their homes. We're going to bring it home for Canadians, Madam Speaker. Thank you.